Hi, I'm Talia Perper. I'm a storyboard artist on Teen Titans Go. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how I storyboard in Adobe Animate, aka Flash. The goal is to give you essentially a starter pack for making your own boards in Flash right away. So let's get started. So I've opened Adobe Animate and I want to make a new file. So I'm going to say create new on the side here. And it pops up with this pop-up window. I want the aspect ratio to be 1920 by 1080 pixels. If you want vertical video, then it would be the opposite, so 1080 by 1920. That's more for social media and TikTok and Instagram Reels and stuff like that. And then frame rate, 24 frames per second. That's what we use on Titans, but you can adjust it to whatever you want. And I'm going to say create. So now we have a blank file. But how do we set up our layers? So here we have the storyboarding template that we use on Titans, just to show you how all the layers are set up. I'm also going to show you publish settings. So this is important for when you export your stuff later. You want to make sure that audio stream is set to raw, and then 44 kilohertz stereo for both audio stream and audio event, and you can adjust them here. So that's that. And then here's how things are laid out. So we've got a guide layer on top here. Right now it's in outline mode just so I can see like strictly the rule of thirds lines, but I can toggle on and off this guide. So if you zoom out, you can see like, oh, it's got this like black boundary on it so that you just see what's on the stage, which is this area of the software. What's nice about having it just be outlines is that if I draw on the outside of this boundary, I can still see things. Oops. I can still see things that are outside of the stage. If I turn it on, then you don't necessarily see things that are outside the stage. There we go. See how it cuts it off? So let's keep it on outline mode for now. You can toggle the layers on and off by clicking on this eyeball here. And you can lock layers. So in case you don't want to mess with something, it's in exactly the right position. You want to be able to click on things without clicking on the wrong layer, you can lock it right over here. And then if I want to adjust the size of the stage within the window, usually I say fit in window, and then I can adjust with this little bar here in between all these boxes. So I can make it as big or small as I want, or I can select one of these presets like, oh, what if I wanted to zoom out a little bit farther so I can see more of the stage, or zoom in really close. I'm going to say fit in window for now. Then we've got our audio layers. So see how there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers for audio right now. In my experience, after maybe 7 layers of audio, it risks the software chugging. So like if you have 7 layers of audio all playing at the same time, that can get pretty chaotic. So I would just keep an eye on how many parallel layers of audio you have going at any one time. But that's just a space for you to start importing your audio. And then you've got character layers down here. It doesn't really matter how many you have, but like it's just a way for you to start like layering in your background, your characters, your props, like so that each of them have their own layers. Then you've got the toolbar on the side here with all your different tools. I'll explain the hotkeys for the ones that I use the most often when storyboarding as we go along. So we'll get to that later. And then over here we have properties. So like right now I'm using the brush tool, which is B for brush. And I can toggle. This is how strokes are normally if you select them. Like Adobe Animate is a vector-based program, so if I press Q to transform, there won't be any like crunchiness or like the same way that there would be with bitmap. But that's a nice aspect of the program. Alternatively, if I press B and then hotkey J, I can toggle on and off this thing called object mode. So this is something that I discovered that's a little more similar to Storyboard Pro for those who are more familiar with that. But the difference is that if I'm drawing outside of object mode, say, and I'm making lots of different lines on top of each other, Flash will treat that as its own shape. Like, and then it gets a little hairy if like, oh, I want to get rid of this part, and then I have to like, there's all these raggedy edges. So that can be troubling. But if I toggle J to get back to object mode, then if I draw a bunch of lines on top of each other, it'll treat each individual line as its own shape. So I can also step into each individual line and it'll say, oh, drawing object. And it'll treat that as its own object. And then I can like cut off parts of it. And then in the main timeline, you see that like, oh, there's no ragged edges, stuff like that. So the caveat with object mode is that there are some people who say like, oh, if you use object mode, it's going to make the software crash. In my experience, I haven't had Flash crash any more so than any of my other coworkers on Titans. So like, I don't know what to tell them, but it's just something that you can use as a tool. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Like, it's totally up to you. Let's import some audio. So I'm going up to the audio layers up here, and I'm selecting the frame that I want the audio to begin at, and I'm going to go to File, Import, Import to Library. This is just some sample audio that I used for a previous project, so I'm just going to select a couple of these lines, like let's say these three, and I'm going to say Open. And then those 3 lines of audio are now in the library over here. So if I want to bring them into my timeline, I just click and drag onto the stage. And it'll plunk the first frame of that audio into the keyframe that I chose for it to plunk into. So now, Storyboard Artists demand clarity. If I want to cut this clip off, instead of having it like trail off into infinity over here, I can choose the frame that I want it to end at, and I can say F7 to create blank keyframe. Keyframes are an important concept for Flash across the board, but this is one way you can use them, and I'll teach you the hotkeys as we go. So now I have this piece of audio. Let's say I want to split this audio in half. So I would select the frame that I want to clip it at, and then I'd right click and say split audio. So now I can say shift click and select those frames and then F7 to create blank keyframe. Now these 2 clips are independent of each other and I can manipulate them as I see fit. If I step into the properties of this clip, over here under Edit Sound Envelope, it'll still show me the rest of the clip, but this vertical line here shows where the cut is in that clip. So this is the end of this particular clip. And let's say I want it to fade out at the end. Like I want it to start at the maximum volume and like go down to nothing. So see this little white square here? That's a keyframe of the audio. So you can place a new keyframe by just clicking anywhere on this horizontal line here, and then bring it all the way down if you want it to be 0. So now when I say OK, and I play this clip again, just a Storyboard Artists. See, the audio faded out over the course of the clip. So using those tools, you can manipulate audio to be at exactly the levels you want and do effects and like all kinds of cuts, and like you can essentially build an audio play with all the lines of dialogue that you have and all the sound effects that you have and all the music that you have, and just like rinse and repeat until you have a full audio play for your short. Okay, so I've opened up this example of a Teen Titans Go storyboard file just to show you how we build shots for the show. Since I explained guide layers already in a separate clip, I just wanted to explain that see how this guide layer is turned off visibly. If I click on this eyeball, it'll come back. But because this is a guide layer, see this like little ruler icon here? Regardless of whether I see it or don't see it in the main timeline, it won't publish to the final video. So the guide layer is strictly to act as a guide. And you can designate that here by right-clicking on the layer and checking guide. And if you uncheck it, it'll become a normal layer again. But let's keep it a guide for now. So here we have a typical shot layout for a normal shot. I'll step into this shot, which I've made into a symbol, which I'll explain later, but I'll say V to select and then double click on this symbol to step into that layer. And you can see that I've got a background layer here. I've got a white transparency that's very subtle, but I'll click on that and show you. So I've made this white rectangle into a symbol that I can then adjust the alpha or opacity of that shape. So I can increase it or decrease it. It's just for the sake of, for storyboards, distinguishing the characters a little bit better from the background instead of having to fill them in with white all the time. So that's that. We got a background, transparency, and then each of these characters have their own layer, which is important because there's this aspect of Flash called onion skinning, which is really helpful for animation. Like if I want to have two different keyframes, like with Starfire here, I can turn onion skinning on, which is this like double circle button here. And anything in blue, if I extend this into the past here, anything in blue is a keyframe that's previous, and anything in green is a keyframe that's ahead. So you can use that to plan out your keyframes and try to like keep acting subtle between different poses or big between different poses. So that's a really helpful tool, and giving each character their own layer allows you to isolate each character. So if I say lock on Starfire, I can like get rid of that onion skinning even though the tool is on. And then if I want to adjust, like for example, size pose here, then I can easily draw that like this, just using the onion skinning as a guide. I'm drawing real rough right now, but you get the idea. Now, depending on the needs of your shot, you might arrange your layers differently. So in this shot, we have the Titans in the foreground and Robin moving in the background. And I want to make sure that the silhouettes of the Titans are overlapping Robin so that it maintains the illusion that they're in front of him or like closer to the camera and Robin is farther away. So the Titans don't have any lines in this particular shot, so I just made them all into one group, which I'll explain later. And I filled them all in with a colored fill that's similar to the background color, but stands out enough so that you can distinguish them. And then I have Robin in the background, and so his action, because his layer is underneath the foreground layer, it creates that like multiplane effect. Now, what do I mean when I say groups, and what do I mean when I say symbols in Flash? Groups and symbols are very powerful tools, and I'm going to explain the differences now. So here we have a group. See this teal boundary around this shape we got here? So if I double click on that group, I can see that there's even more subgroups within it. And if I double click on that, now I see there's a line art group and a fill group. Uh, and then the idea is that a group is a collection of lines or shapes. So I can draw like a bunch of shapes and lines and maybe like, I can click on this rectangle tool here and make a little shape there. And if I want all these things to be together and I can move them around as one shape, then I can say Command G and then move that around as one entity. So the distinction between that kind of thing and symbols is that, like, let's take this one of Robin, for example. So I double clicked on that symbol, which is, it has a blue boundary around the shape. So if I step into that, you see I have this one keyframe of Robin, Robin, and the whiteboard. So each of those is a group, but because this is now a symbol, I can say Command C to copy and bring that anywhere in my file, and it'll make that the same throughout the whole file. So for example, if I want to draw something on this whiteboard, like a smiley face, now anywhere that symbol appears, it will have the same shape. So that's one really helpful thing about symbols is that, like, say you made your background into a symbol and you get a note that's like, hey, I need this one aspect of a change. Like, can you move this plant over to, like, from the left to the right or whatever? That means that you can do that in that symbol. You can make that revision, and now it will affect every other shot that uses that symbol. So you don't have to go meticulously through every board to fix that same mistake. So that's really helpful. Now, here's another really effective way to use symbols in Flash. So let's say I have this birthday cake and I need to light the candles on it. I need each candle to have a little flame. So I'm gonna draw a little flame, and then I'm gonna make that little brush stroke into a symbol by using F8, and I'm gonna select type graphic because graphic symbols loop through their frames consistently, or at least give you the ability to. Uh, Movie clips are a little bit different in that it's more for like special effects and like gradients and like things that you can't necessarily do with graphics. Buttons is more for like creating websites and that kind of thing. But let's just keep it on graphic for now, and I'm gonna name this flame. So now I've made this drawing into a symbol. Now I can step into that symbol and it'll show me a new timeline that only has one keyframe in it. And the biggest takeaway I want you to get from this is that symbols are containers for animation or keyframes. So let's make this flame flicker a little bit. So I'm gonna say F7 to create new keyframe. I'm gonna turn onion skinning on so I can see what I did before. And I'm gonna draw a new shape. And then I'm gonna do the same thing, F7, and then maybe extend this to see what I did before. I'm gonna watch this play a little bit. Cool, so now I have a flickering flame. Now I can take this symbol and say copy, 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 paste, copy, paste. Now we've got 5 flames all doing the same thing. And that was like a fraction of a second. So now I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, flames don't really all flicker at the same rate. So, like, how do we make it feel a little more natural? So I would go back through these symbols, and maybe this one starts, as you can see, under looping here. you have all these different looping options. There's play graphic in loop, play graphic once, like it'll end after a certain amount of time. Play single frame, I'll get to that in a second. And then reverse in the opposite directions. So then let's say I want this second candle to start at frame 3. Now it will continue to loop, but it's starting like a couple frames later than the last one. And I'll do the same thing for this. Like maybe this one starts at 5, maybe this one starts at 7, maybe this one starts at oh, there's only 6, so let's do 2. Uh, now all the candles are flickering at different rates, which is exactly what I wanted. Another great way of using symbols is the single frame option. So let's say you have a character's head and you want to do lip sync. So maybe there's like maybe there's a smile here. Let's make that smile into a symbol using F8 and say mouth pack. Now I can step into that symbol and make a bunch of different frames with different mouths. So like we got an open one, we've got a munchin one, we got like maybe a different kind of chew, and then a different kind of chew here. So now I have all these different types of mouths. If I let it play right now, it'll cycle through all those different frames all at once. But if I select that symbol and I say play single frame for the graphic, then it'll only play it'll only show the keyframe that I have indicated here with first. So if I want the mouth to look like that, then I can do that. Then I can use the frame picker to pick exactly the shape that I want for the mouth. And then let's say I want to do, you know, a cycle of different ones, then I could say, you know, like F6 to create new keyframe, and then let's pick number 4, and then F6 to create new keyframe, and then select number, which one was it? It was 5. So each new keyframe I make in the timeline, I can select exactly which mouth I want to appear at any one time. So symbols are containers for keyframes or animation, and you can use them in a number of different ways. Okay, so another really powerful way to use symbols in Flash is to contain all the keyframes for a shot that you have boarded in Flash and take all those keyframes and put them into a symbol. And now you can do all sorts of things with that symbol that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if they were all loose keyframes in the main timeline. I'll show you this example. So I've built out 2 shots here with like backgrounds, characters, and you know, all on different layers. And I made these 2 shots into symbols, so now I can place keyframes along those lines and make transitions. So like if I get rid of this underlayer here just to show you an example. So this keyframe is the starting keyframe, and then I placed another keyframe here, and if I press V to select the symbol, you can see that I've reduced the alpha to 0. And then I selected this area and I put in a classic ease here. Like this is the button for creating a tween in between like keyframes. Usually you would use this to move things across the screen. So like for example, if I have a ball here and I want to make it travel across the stage. So let's select that shape and then say F8 ball. Then as you can see, I have a keyframe here, and I'm gonna place another keyframe here with F6, like create keyframe from, you know, the stuff that already exists. So now if this is the starting keyframe and this is the ending keyframe, and I can move this across the screen and then select these frames and say, what does this say? I believe it's just like the tween button. And so now this area has become purple and it shows this arrow going from one keyframe to the next keyframe. And so now if I want to adjust that motion, like going, see how it's so robotic and then just like it's a super even rate from one to the other. Now I can step into classic ease, and then they give me a bunch of options like ease in, ease in and out, and then you can like customize it to whatever you want. Like for our purposes, let's just do ease in and out. I'm gonna say quad. Like there's all these different options for it. Usually quad is enough. So now it's gonna start out slow, go a little bit faster in the middle, and then end up like in its final position. That's a lot smoother than the alternative. So that's the typical way of using symbols, is moving things across the screen at the rates that you want them to move. Uh, However, you can also, because symbols contain keyframes, you don't have to be limited to just one keyframe for your symbol. You can contain many keyframes. So you can animate something and then like take that symbol and make it do all sorts of stuff. So uh I've made this background and characters like into all separate layers. This otter on the rock is moving towards the camera. The background of the tower is on a separate layer, and then I've got just a gray fill just to like keep it all together. So now when I step out of this, that's my shot, right? With nothing else on it. And then from this keyframe to this keyframe, I've faded it out. So again, when you select it and you see color effects, you can adjust the opacity of a symbol by adjusting the alpha. So if I want this to fade out completely, I'll set it to 0. And then I have this shot underneath. So that's why I put the gray backing here, so that when it fades out, it doesn't instantly show the stuff behind. Like that's kind of a stark transition. But if I have a solid background here, then that won't happen because the gray fill is also reducing in opacity at the rate that I want it to. So that's one cool thing. And then I've also, let's get rid of this. The beginning keyframe of this shot starts at a certain distance, like from the camera. And then this secondary keyframe is a little bit closer. So I wanted to do like a slow push in on this shot. So I made this a little closer and I created this quad ease out so that like the camera is like slowly pushing in and then stopping. And so all together,
does anyone know
like
why
that.
friend Robin has called this meeting?
Here's the thing you got to remember about making tweens in Flash. So right now I've drawn this little cube here, and you can see with the boundary around it that it's this teal color, which means it's a group. It's not a symbol. So if I try to plant a new keyframe here with F6, and I select these frames the way that I would with any other symbol, and I say create tween, it'll come up with this pop-up that says the selected frame span cannot be tweens. You must convert frame content to a symbol in order to tween. Do you want to convert and create to a tween? Like you could do that, but what will happen is it will create this tween. Oh, let me move this keyframe over. It's now created these tweens in the library that, like, frankly, you can do it this way, but it makes things a little less organized. And if you want to change things later, uh, like, for example, if I want to, like, put an X there. Like, now because this is defined as tween 1 and this is defined as tween 2, like it will only affect tween 2 if I make any revisions. So that's why it's much better to organize your symbols and groups more so. So in that case, let's restart here. Clear keyframe and remove classic tween. So let's say Command B to break this symbol. Let's say we want to make it a new type of symbol. So we'll say F8 cube. Now if I have a keyframe here and a keyframe here and I move it over here, then I say create tween. And then now if I affect this symbol, it will affect all the frames within that symbol. And it'll affect everything else, like every other frame that uses that symbol. So that's really important to keep in mind when you're building your shots in Flash, because if you're using the same principles to create individual shots in Flash, then you want to make sure that you're like keeping things consistent across all shots in case you need to make revisions. So let's say we want to make a section of the main timeline into a symbol. We're going to select all these frames and say copy frames. Then we're going to turn on the guide and see how there's this little plus in the middle there. It's helpful. You don't need it, but it helps align things in a way that I'll show you soon. So I'm going to draw in this top layer, I'm going to draw a little dummy mark. And then I'm going to select that mark and say F8 shot psi one shot, because there's only one character in the shot. And if I put shot at the beginning, then it'll arrange all of my shots together alphabetically in the library. So I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to double click to step into that symbol. See, it says shot psi one shot up there. And right now there's only one keyframe and it's the little mark that I made. So I'm going to select that keyframe and say paste and overwrite frames. Now I've pasted those frames into the symbol. So now when I step out, if I click scene 1, now I can select that symbol. See, it's got that blue boundary around it. Fit in a window. So now I can use the arrow keys to shimmy this over to exactly where I had it before, essentially. And then I can select those old layers and say clear frames. Now I've got a whole shot all in one symbol here. Isn't that amazing? So if I get a note from a director that's like, oh, can you shift this a little bit over to the left? No problem.
I'm guessing it has something to do with our logo.
Easy peasy. The alternative to that, I mean, like, you don't have to do things that way, but what's the benefit of it is, like, say I got a note for this shot over here that is like, oh, we need to shift this over to the side a little bit. I would have to say edit multiple frames, and I'd have to go to the beginning and then extend this across all the different keyframes here, and I'd have to like select them all, and then I'd have to like shift them all over to the side. But if your shots are mega long and you have so many keyframes and they're all in different spots, and like it just gets more confusing. So it's nice to have all your shots in these shot symbols so that you can have separate modes for like, oh, this is where I do my camera moves and this is where I adjust the camera. And then like if I step into the shot, that's where I can adjust the acting. Like, see, this is Cyborg's layer here. So that can be a really, really helpful tool for building shots and adjusting camera in your board. So here's an example of how we put all that stuff together. So here I've got a shot of Robin doing some character acting. Let's play it through.
Hey, B, C. A, always B, B, C, crime fighting. Always be crime fighting. Always be crime fighting!
Okay, so I looked at the script. I decided that this chunk of the dialogue felt like it deserved its own shot. And I was trying to replicate the movie that this is referencing, so I was referencing that as I was thinking about this moment, and this felt like an appropriate chunk of time before I started to get like bored with this particular shot. So let's go back to the beginning. Uh, and I'm gonna see how in the audio play I've chunked out like, oh, this is like the amount of audio separated by these blank keyframes of like this is the amount of audio that's playing during this moment. So essentially what I did was the same thing that I did for the keyframes themselves is I said copy frames, selected all those, right clicked to say copy frames. And then I went to the beginning of this shot that I built all the layers out in the main timeline. I brought all those keyframes in, and I also brought in all the audio, and I said like paste and overwrite frames to bring all that in. So now the audio that's in my symbol is usable and I can hear it. It won't be heard when I export it, but it's just there as like to guide me through the character acting. So I try to place my keyframes at the beats of the dialogue. Like the way that I've been explaining it to people is that dialogue or spoken word audio is not far off from like a song that you might hear. Like there's like really high pitches, there's really low pitches, there's like rhythms and cadences and all these different sort of punctuating moments within a line of dialogue that give me an idea for like, oh, it feels like, for example, in this one, Robin's kind of like escalating throughout the clip. So I'm giving him certain poses on certain lines that get more and more escalated over time. And as you can see, you know, I'm trying to align, like, you know, there's this smack of the whiteboard. I try to get my smack pose to be aligned with the peak of this audio. It's actually off by like 1 frame. Like, so you can see those waveforms and you can hear them in your headphones by making sure that the sound preferences for sync are set to stream. That's how you hear the scrubbing of the audio.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, crime fighting.
So like, you know, A, always B, B, C, crime fighting. There's like these peaks in the audio that you can see in the timeline. So I try to line up the first pop of a pose with the peak of that audio. And so at the beginning, he's like pointing, pointing, pointing. And then presenting, 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 presenting. Then slap, slap, slap.
Be crime fighting. Always be crime fighting.
So then he like gets all up in the screen and is like, you know, screaming at that point. And so one thing that my director did to sort of take that to the next level is he added an extra camera move, like a punch in on each of those last punctuating lines. So we put a keyframe here and a keyframe close. So like, you know, there's only 3 frames going from one keyframe to the next keyframe. So that's a pretty quick punch in. And this is just a classic ease, no fuss.
Always be crime fighting!
So then on crime fighting, it pushes in again, and now it's like even more extreme. So this is a good way for you to understand like, oh, this is how we layer all these elements together. It starts with the audio, you're building character acting and like laying out your keyframes according to the punctuations of the audio and the rhythms and all that stuff. Like that's like the fun part of boarding. And then coming back out into the main timeline, now you have everything as a symbol all together, so you can adjust all your camera moves and like do all the transitions and things that you want. And you basically just do that over and over again until the board is done. So now your board is complete and you're ready to export. So we go up to File, we say Export, and if you want it to be like the type of video that you can post to social media or the internet or like send it through Dropbox or any kind of file sharing thing to someone else, you can say export video/media. And then it'll give you options for your aspect ratio. It'll say like, do you want to ignore the stage color? Like, do you want to make the background transparent? We don't want that. We want the entire movie, not just a frame range. Format should be H.264. And then you can select where you want that file to be output to. I want it to be in this Adobe Animate tutorial file. So I'm going to say save. And then you should check this box that says start Adobe Media Encoder render queue immediately and say export. So once you get the pop-up that it's all done, it'll show up in the file that you told it to go, and you can preview that, and it'll play just like any other video.
Does anyone know why?
And that's it. You've made a storyboard in Flash, and now you can share it with the world.